Picture this. You spend years writing a will that leaves everything equally to your children, and you die thinking it's all sorted. Then your entire superannuation balance, $420,000, goes to your ex-partner instead, because of one form you never checked. This isn't a freak accident, it's how the system is built. Around 1 in 5 super accounts has no valid binding nomination, which means the fund trustee, not you, decides who gets the money. Today I'll show you 3 moves to take that decision back. Audit your nomination, lodge a binding one, and align it with your will. Here's the number that should stop you scrolling. Of the $17.6 billion in super death benefits paid out in 2023, an estimated $3.5 billion went out under trustee discretion rather than a valid nomination. APRA Annual Fund Level Statistics 2023 and industry estimates. But here's the part nobody tells you. That pile exists almost entirely because people assume their will has it covered. So we're doing 3 moves today. Audit who currently receives your super, lodge a valid binding nomination, and align it all with your will. Each takes under 20 minutes and every one of them is free. The first quiet leak is assuming your will controls your super when, legally, it usually doesn't. Superannuation is held in a trust and does not automatically form part of your estate to be distributed under your will. Law Connect. Unless you direct your super to your legal personal representative, that's the executor of your estate, through a valid binding death benefit nomination, the trustee decides who receives it at their own discretion. And the law limits who can even receive it: your spouse, your children, financial dependents, an interdependent partner, or your estate. Colin Biggers and Paisley. So if your will leaves super to a sibling who isn't a super law dependent, the trustee can't pay them directly and falls back on discretion. Without a binding nomination, 100% of your super is at trustee discretion. With one, that drops to 0. The second layer is even sneakier. Lapsed, invalid or non-binding nominations that quietly turn your instructions into mere suggestions. A binding nomination must be in writing, signed, dated, and witnessed by 2 adults who aren't beneficiaries, allocating 100% across permitted people, Bayside wills. And under most fund deeds, it lapses after 3 years unless you reconfirm it. A non-binding nomination is advisory only. It gives the trustee discretion. Full stop. Law Connect. So people treat the first form as set and forget, never realising it expires or becomes wildly out of date after a divorce or new relationship. And when it's contested, delays and disputes can add 12 to 24 months to the estate and rack up $50,000 to $100,000 in legal fees, SMSF Australia industry commentary. Let's kill the myth right now. The myth is that your superannuation is automatically part of your estate, so your will decides who gets it. The fact is, super is held in trust and passes outside your estate according to the fund's rules, Law Connect Smallwoods, and your will can only direct it if you nominate your legal personal representative. Put the 2 costs side by side. In the real case, a single unchecked form sent $420,000 to an ex-partner against the ACE will, Law Connect, Colin Biggers and Paisley. And for the case study you're about to meet, a balance growing to around $900,000 by retirement sites entirely at trustee discretion. One decision away from the wrong person. Meet Kylie. She's 52, a senior nurse earning $110,000 a year with $380,000 in a large industry super fund and 13 years until she plans to retire. She's divorced with 2 adult children, and she updated her will after the divorce to leave everything equally to them. Here's what Kylie found when she actually checked. Discovery 1. $380,000 of her super isn't covered by her will at all. Reading her funds disclosure, she learns most of her super doesn't form part of her estate and can't be distributed through her will, Law Connect, Colin Biggers and Paisley. She assumed her kids would inherit her full $1.03 million in home plus super, but only the $650,000 home is guaranteed, a 37% gap. Discovery 2, malware, and this is the gut punch. On her super portal, she finds a non-binding nomination dated 2015 naming her ex-husband for 100% of the death benefit. Because it's non-binding, the trustee keeps discretion, but they treat it as a strong signal of her past wishes. Bayside Wills, Colin Biggers and Paisley. If she died today, the trustee could lawfully send the entire $380,000 to her ex, instead of $95,000 each she intended for her kids. Discovery 3 makes it worse over time. At 6% net growth plus contributions, her balance could reach roughly $900,000 by age 65. SMSF Australia projection. Her fund uses 3-year lapsing nomination, so even if she fixes it today and a new relationship comes along at 60, an expired form could leave nearly 47% of her projected wealth at trustee discretion. Add it all up, and Kylie's children could lose up to $900,000 in super to unintended beneficiaries over her lifetime, purely from estate planning mistakes. APRA 2023, SMSF Australia. That's modelled at 6% net over 13 years, with steady contributions and the full balance redirected under trustee discretion. So could this be you? Check these 3 signs. You've never logged in to look at your beneficiary nomination, you don't actually know if it's binding or non-binding, and you haven't updated it since a divorce, new partner, or new child. If any of those apply, do move 1 before you close this video. Here's the good news. Fixing this is genuinely quick, and the payoff is your biggest asset ending up where you want it. We're going to do 3 moves. Audit who currently receives your super, lodge a valid binding nomination, and align the whole thing with your will. None of them costs a cent, and together they take the decision out of a stranger's hands and put it back in yours. Move 1. Audit who currently receives your super. Log into your fund's portal and download your death benefit nomination record, looking for sections labelled Beneficiaries, Death Benefit Nomination, or Estate Planning. Colin Biggers and Paisley. You want to know 3 things. Is it binding or non-binding? Does it have an expiry date? And exactly whose names and percentages are on it? Here's how. Sign in via MyGov or directly to your super fund, open the Beneficiaries or Death Benefit page, and note the nomination type, the expiry date, and each name and share. What good looks like is a binding nomination, 100% allocated, with no ex-partners and an expiry date that hasn't passed. Move 2. Lodge a valid binding death benefit nomination that reflects your wishes today. Request the official binding nomination form from your fund's website or member services. Bayside Wills. Nominate only eligible dependents or your legal personal representative. Make sure the percentages total 100 and get it witnessed properly, because this is general information, not personal advice. 3 steps. Download the official binding form, complete it, nominating only dependents or your legal personal representative, totaling 100%. Then sign and date it in front of 2 adult witnesses who aren't beneficiaries and confirm the fund received it. What good looks like is a fund-acknowledged binding nomination you review every 3 years or after any major life event. Move 3. Coordinate your super with your broader estate plan so nothing contradicts anything. Read ASIC's Money Smart guidance on how super interacts with wills and legal personal representatives, regulator material. Then compare your will's beneficiaries and executor against your super nomination. You're hunting for gaps, conflicts, or gifts to people who aren't super law dependents. Here's how to close the loop. Read Money Smart on super as a non-estate asset, line up your will's beneficiaries against your nomination, and where they clash, have a solicitor align your will, your binding nomination, and any SMSF deed or pension. What good looks like is all 3 documents pointing the same way with no gaps and no conflicts. Why does any of this exist? Back in 1993, the SIS Act made super a trust-based system, paid to dependents or your estate, not simply under your will, SMSF Australia. In 2007, tax reforms made benefits to non-dependents more heavily taxed, raising the stakes of directing super correctly. And from 2021 to 2024, funds and case law have pushed Australians to review nominations regularly, rather than assume a will is enough. Once you've acted, verify it's stuck. You should see the word binding and a valid expiry date in your portal. You should confirm the fund sent written acknowledgement of your nomination, and if your life changes, you should relodge rather than wait for it to lapse. 2 minutes of checking now saves a contested estate later. Everything I've quoted today comes from named legal and regulatory sources, Law Connect, Colin Biggers and Paisley, Bayside Wills, SMSF Australia, and APRA's superannuation statistics. The full links are in the description below so you can read the fine print yourself before you act. So here's what you've learned. Your super usually sits outside your will, and only a valid binding nomination puts you back in control. Next, I'm breaking down the super death tax that quietly shrinks what your kids actually receive. So make sure you're subscribed to catch it. If this saved you from a costly mistake, hit subscribe. It's the one thing that tells us to keep reading the fine print so you don't have to. Share it with someone who's just updated their will because they probably forgot their super entirely.